Welcome to the Creating Your Conditions podcast, a work of understanding career and life experiences. What are the conditions you were given, the conditions you have made for yourselves, and the conditions you have yet to forge? My name is Vincenzo. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am the host of this podcast. I'm an avid reader, a connector of humans, a professional fundraiser with 7 years of nonprofit experience, and more recently, a creator. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Erik Osugi, he, him pronouns. Ever since Erik started out as a high school history teacher in San Francisco, he has consistently supported inner city youth in overcoming their challenges to succeed in school, work, and life. From the Bay Area to New York City to Los Angeles, he is connected with students, parents, teachers, and administrators to provide quality youth programs that make a difference. So without further ado, I leave you with this episode. Welcome to the podcast, Erik.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
How's it going today?
Another beautiful day in Southern California. It's hard to miss.
Yeah, you have a great ambient light over there. I'm kind of jealous.
Yeah, we pay high rent.
That is the reality of a beautiful day 75% of the year.
Yes, it's much better than the basement apartments I had to live in New York City. So I'm moving on up in the world.
Okay, I'm sure we'll get to this in your interview, but when did you live in New York? What time period?
Let's see. That was about 2000, I'm guessing. Yeah, around 2000 to around 2010.
Okay.
I mean, plus or minus 1 or 2 years on the front and back end of that.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Sweet.
But yes, those
all
were
right.
terrible apartments. Every single one of them was like either dangerous or dirty or rat filled or cold. We didn't have heat in one of them. It was just terrible.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the no heat on when it's
right.
like 16 degrees outside, you're just like, oh my gosh. It's like 30 degrees in the house.
Yeah, tenants' rights have a lot of issues out there, I'm sure.
Yeah. And then my landlord would be like, it's not so bad. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, why do you, like, he wouldn't fix it sometimes, so we had to report him. And then he was like, why did you report me? I said I would fix it.
Because we're cold.
Yeah, and I'm like, because this is illegal. Yeah. He was terrible.
What?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't want to get into all of that. That's just dull. Like, if you're young and not so rich and you have to live in New York City, you're going to live in poor conditions. That's just the way it goes.
I get that. It's so cold though to not be without heat.
So cold. Like we had winter coats on and blankets over us inside.
Yeah.
And we were still freezing.
Yeah. It's just okay. All right. I'll ask more about this maybe later, maybe in another conversation.
Yeah. There's no need. It's just suffering.
Okay. Why don't we start off with where you were born and raised?
I was born and raised in Monterey Park, California, which it's right on the border of East LA. So definitely when I was growing up, it was, pretty much half Mexican American, half Asian American. And, the neighborhood has changed a lot since I've left, but that's the way it was when I was growing up. And there was a lot of white flight. I think there was like probably at least 15%, 20% white. But by the time I hit 6th grade, like I was down to like maybe 3 white classmates.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's a big change. But very Mexican, very Asian. It was Asian like pretty evenly dispersed, or is it?
There were all sorts of different Asians, so that, there were recent immigrants from Vietnam and Taiwan. But then there was also Asian Americans who were like me, 3rd or 4th generation Japanese Americans, and we had 3rd or 4th generation Chinese Americans. We had more recent Koreans. And basically, if you were Filipino or Southeast Asian, like you got all lumped together because there weren't enough of like, any one of those groups. Maybe Filipinos, but definitely not like Laotians or Thai or besides Vietnamese. We had a lot of Vietnamese, but all the other Southeast Asians. But yeah, no, there was a lot of different Asians that our teachers couldn't tell us apart and just assumed that we were all the same, which was great because all my teachers were white.
I see.
Yes.
But like
So,
very few white kids. All right.
very few white kids. So we grew up the dominant majority. And I think that influences me a lot because I never feel intimidated being like the only whatever. Because I grew up pretty confident that no, there's nothing wrong with us. We've been in charge before, so
We have been in charge.
yes, we have ruled the schoolyard.
Do you think that's because you were surrounded by a lot of Asians or because you were third gen in this country already?
Yeah, when I think
both?
about that, it's probably a lot to do with me being third generation because, we weren't struggling as much as the recent immigrants, right? We spoke English. We were born, like our parents spoke English. So like if you were a Vietnamese kid who barely spoke English and you were on the much poorer side, there was way more struggles than for, people like me. And so I'm sure it had a lot to do with, my worldview.
Was
Gave
that
me
difference
unearned confidence.
No, I mean, that's what happens when you have more stability over time, right?
Oh, for sure. Well, it's the same thing too. We had, lots of third and fourth generation Mexican Americans, but, the recent arrival immigrants from Mexico, they were on a lower tier of like respect because, they didn't speak English or they were poor or, they wore the same clothes every day. Whatever the things that kids find to separate themselves, like I guess the dominant group, right, always feels more secure.
And did you notice these things as a kid or like these economic differences in language barriers?
Probably not until like the 5th or 6th grade.
Okay.
Like I wasn't a very smart or observant kid, so I would never notice anything. I attribute that to being a boy too. Boys were just not as socially aware. But yeah, no, in the 5th and 6th grade, I noticed there was starting to differentiate. Like my Mexican friends wouldn't be included in the honors whatever English class or or they couldn't go on the overnight trips to Yosemite. And yeah, it started to bug me a little bit, like, because these were my friends and it was like, I'm no smarter or no better than them, but obviously we were treated differently. And yeah, and it bugged me a little. Like I think that the kicker was like in the 7th grade when a group of students were chosen to go to Yosemite with my science teacher, who was a Yosemite forest ranger in the summers, but it was almost all Asian kids. And I was like, this is not fair. And I just remember when the first day back, right? Like my Mexican friends were like, hey, so how was it? And I was like, it wasn't that fun. But I was lying. It was great. And but like just I could see the disappointment in their faces, and so I didn't want to rub it in. But at the time it started to bug me. And I've thought of it since, and yeah, it bugs me more and more. Like as I went through high school and noticed that all of my college prep classes, all of my Mexican friends were basically not in them. And it's like, they didn't pick that. It was picked for them.
Yeah. I mean, you say you weren't observant, but this sounds pretty observant for like 7th grade. Is that, or 5th and 6th grade is like 10, 11 years old. So
yeah, maybe I was a little bit more observant, but not in like for sure not as observant as the girls that age. They were way ahead of me. We didn't talk about those types of things, but yeah, they noticed everything.
What did they notice? Like they noticed these things before and they would talk about them versus like maybe boys wouldn't talk about this stuff?
Yeah, no, I never remember talking about anything like that when I was a boy, like 10, 11 years old. Like,
Yeah.
all my friends, we all hung out and we all just kind of made fun of each other just constantly, like for being poor, for being Asian, or for being Mexican, or for being smart, or for being dumb. Like it didn't matter what you were, like you were going to get made fun of. That's how everybody kind of interacted. But the girls definitely didn't do that.
Ah.
The girls were much more considerate and I think just more observant of I don't know, of the interplay. Like they knew who was, I guess, more popular or unpopular, but the guys were just like, huh, we're just playing baseball. Who cares? We're so like simple-minded.
Yeah. Got you. So outside of school, what was it like growing up in Monterey Park and like that part of East LA that has a lot of like immigrants too and a lot of Asian people?
Yeah. Well, because I'm the age that I am, I grew up in a time that our parents didn't really know where we were. Like we were
Okay.
given complete freedom, like even from little kids. Like I remember being like elementary school, walking, I don't know, a mile and a half to go get tacos and,
Nice.
with my own money. And, it never occurred to me that I would have to tell my mom where I was going. So like we had a lot of freedom. We explored like construction sites. I don't know, hit each other with rocks. We did all these things that basically our parents never knew where we were until it was like nighttime, and then we just had to be home by dark. And that was it. And so I think it was. I mean, in retrospect, I loved it because I was just kind of like always out and about, like ride your bike somewhere or walk somewhere, and you were just kind of responsible for your own fun, which was like, oh, I'm going to go to the park. Maybe somebody's there to play basketball. Oh, I'm going to go to wherever, to the taco stand. Like, you didn't need anything. Or like, oh, I'm just going to walk to my friend's house. Maybe he's home. Wouldn't think to call him. We would just go over there. If he's
Yeah.
not home, you just walk to somebody else's house. And all of these things, I think my nephews and my children would never do. It would never occur to them to show up unannounced someplace.
Yeah.
With somebody you don't know so well.
That's funny. I also appreciated that you said go to a taco stand twice. I feel like that's a very Angelino thing to say, you know? It's
It
like,
was the
yeah, I was going to a
best.
friend's or a taco stand.
Yeah.
Just options.
Like you can get a bean and cheese burrito for like $1. And it was so good and it was so
Nice.
filling. And it was like, oh, this is the best.
I do love me a good bean and cheese burrito. And like
Yeah,
a potato taco,
yeah,
underrated.
yeah.
Underrated.
They're delicious. And yeah. And like I can even remember just like being pretty little and like maybe fifth or sixth grade, like just getting on a bus and saying, we're going to go to the beach. It's like, I don't know how long it's going to take because, we don't know how to read those schedules or anything.
3 hours.
Yeah, no, it was like 3.5 hours. We're like, dang. By the time we get there, we're going to have to like get on the bus back because we have to make it back before dark.
Yeah.
But we did it anyway because it was just, I don't know. It was the idea of creating your own fun or just doing something is always better than being bored.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we didn't have cell
Interesting.
phones. We didn't have video games.
Yeah. And so your parents, did they have kind of the same attitude as you got older, like through middle school and college, or high school? Middle school and high
Yeah,
school?
no, entirely. They were pretty much, as long as I was getting good grades, and good grades were, of course, straight A's. As long as I was getting good grades, like they didn't really bother me.
There's only one category of good grades in an Asian
yeah,
household. It's straight A's. If you got a B, that's not good grades.
Yeah, no, if you got a B, then it was like, what are you, stupid? How did you do that? Like, what did you?
Yep.
Yeah. So even showing my father, like, if ever he asked, I would show him like a test thing, and it was like, oh, I got a 98. 98? What'd you get wrong? And it's like, I did it too quickly. I made a mistake. Oh.
I did it too quickly. Couldn't get
Yes.
100.
Yes. No, I mean, that's pretty much like, I remember even my driving test, I think I got like a 98, and I was arguing about it later when the proctor gave me the test results. And I said, no, 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 I checked my mirror. I distinctly remember checking my mirror. Like, I don't want these 2 points off. Can you take that off? She's like, what are you arguing about? You passed. Like, I'm not going to change anything. And I was like, no, I really need you to change this, because like, I'm never going to hear the end of it from my father about like, what an idiot for not, passing a driver's test. I mean, I passed, but it was, anything wrong would just be shameful.
Have you carried any of those traits as a parent now yourself?
Oh, for sure. But it's, I mean, at such a degree that's, it's not even comparable. Like, I could joke about it with my kids, and
Yeah.
they understand I'm joking about it. But yeah, no, am I more pressuring than, say other non-Asian parents? For sure. Like,
Gotcha.
I do it much more humorously than my own parents did to me. And, the fact that I ever bring it up at all, I think a lot of my kids' friends' parents, they don't even discuss it because they don't want to give any pressure on their kids. And it's like, well, no pressure is not good enough either, because,
Yeah.
some
It's
of
true.
my kids' friends get like straight Fs. And I'm like, straight Fs? How's that possible? Like, that's just like,
Can you even be at school with straight
yeah,
Fs?
no, I'm just like, for me, would you even let that kid live in your house? Like, my gosh. So,
Oh
yes.
man.
And partly, I think that would be my own pride. Like, I couldn't have my kid getting straight Fs. That's not who I am. Yes, it's not rational, and it's definitely.
Yeah. What was your relationship like with your parents outside of the grades?
I would say it was fiercely independent. Like, I mean, they made me work. My grandmother owned a shop in Little Tokyo, so I would work there on weekends as an elementary school student. Like, my mother owned a wholesale produce market in downtown LA. So, from the age of 10, I was up at 4 a.m. to be there. So, like, there was definitely expectations of you have to work, you have to get good grades. And so, how does that define my relationship with them? I guess it would just be pretty high expectations, not a lot of coddling.
There's not a lot of time for coddling if you're working at 4 a.m. and then going to school and getting straight A's and no less than 100, apparently.
Yeah. No, but see, for me,
That's
that was all
wild.
normal, because I had friends that were in similar positions, like maybe not the straight A's part, but definitely it was like, we're not going to pay for your college, so you better start working now. So I had friends that worked since they were like 12. Not, we weren't making a lot of money or anything, but we didn't spend a lot of money either.
Yeah.
Bean and cheese burrito, only $1.
But just the idea that you had to start earning for college at 10 is wild to me.
Well, the thing is, too, my mother grew up in that same store that my grandmother owned. So my mother was working from, from the time she could walk, right? And like, yeah, there weren't very few elementary school age kids in my grade, or, my peers. I could make change way faster than any of them. Like, arithmetic, like, hands down. Like, you give me a $20 bill, any amount that it's less than that, I can give you exact change in seconds. Because my grandmother would just be like, you're taking too long, you're too slow. So that nice side, grandma that makes apple pies and stuff, that wasn't my grandma.
Your grandma taught you a crucial life skill of giving $20 in change or
Well,
breaking 20s.
well, the one thing that she did teach me was that never be idle. There's always something you could be doing. And that was
Mm.
instilled, I think, working so much, right? Because like if you're at the store, you're there, you could always be sweeping. If there's no customers, you could always be doing this. You could always be reshelving things. But as soon as a customer walks in, you have to give them your immediate attention.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that was so yeah, now as an old man, that bothers me when I walk into a place and they just kind of ignore me for 10 minutes. I'm like, wow, the customer service here it's terrible.
Back when I was 10 and
Yeah,
providing
back when I
excellent
was
customer
10.
service, like not just back in my day, but back when I was 10,
Yeah, which makes
I
it
would
sound
never.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's because I could feel like the back of my grandma's hand and hitting me in the back of the head. Like every time I do something wrong, like, oh, okay, don't do that.
And
Yes.
like it's
So,
still there, even though you don't work a
oh,
sales
for
job
sure.
anymore.
For sure. Yeah. And, it's the same thing. Like if I make a grammar mistake, I can feel my dad's yelling at me like, what are you don't know this proper, I don't know, conjunction? Or no. So,
Yeah.
yes, we don't make mistakes. Or we do. We make plenty of mistakes, but we're just used to getting punished for it.
Yep. So it sounds like you were, raised in like an intergenerational, like household, or at least community, because you had your parents and your grandparents there. And so I wonder like how much of like their history since you grew up around them and worked so closely with them.
I never knew anything until I was, maybe college age. Because as a kid, we just didn't question it. Like
Of course.
it wouldn't have even been entertained, I think. Like if we asked them, like, it wasn't until very recently that I learned how my parents met. Or it wasn't until very recently. Like, my grandmother passed away a couple decades ago, but she lived to be 103. But like, it wasn't
Wow.
until I was in my 20s when I could ask her anything about her life. And even then it was like, huh? Why do you want to know about that? Like, it was a
It's in the
very simple thing.
past.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And so like I learned Japanese because I spent a semester abroad in Japan to learn Japanese. And when I came home, I was like, oh, I could talk to my grandma now because her English was, even though she lived in in the States for 90 years, like her English wasn't very good. So when I came back from Japan and I could speak, pretty well, I was like, oh, you don't have that many things to share. You just go to work every day. That's all you do. Like you can tell me all the gossip about all the people that come into the shop, but there's not a lot of wisdom there. I don't want to know who's a drinker and who's like cheating on whom. Like she knew all of the gossip from like 80 years of Little Tokyo,
Right.
working in a shop in Little Tokyo. Like, and she worked there for every day for 80 years. She worked until she was past 100.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Think she worked that late? Wow.
Exactly. And
That's wild.
And nobody questioned it. Everybody's like, yeah, grandma's going to work, whatever.
She needs her gossip.
But she really enjoyed the gossip. She really enjoyed mixing it up with people. And so why would we take that from her?
Yeah.
She was like, what am I going to do if I stay at home?
Right.
And we were like, I don't know.
She had a sense of purpose, and I'm sure people looked forward to seeing her there, like a constant space in your community, right?
Yeah.
Like a third place being a shop or grocery store that everyone frequents outside of work and home.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, that store was 100 years old too, so it was she was pretty steady presence.
It's cool. So let's see. What was high school like for you? A little bit further in timeline.
Let's see. High school was pretty busy because I was a pretty good student, right? I had, every AP class that you can take. I was on the wrestling team. I was in student government. I was in
Nice.
the service club, key club. I was in, I can't remember all the things that I was in, but it was a
You're
lot. And so,
stacked.
yeah, no, it was a very, very active high school student. Definitely involved in so many things that I was constantly, again, it leads back to the, I guess, the pattern now that I'm seeing is like, no, we're always busy. We're always doing something. There's always more that you could be doing. And, some
Mm,
things were easier than others. Like student government's easy. You didn't really have to do anything like, oh, plan a dance or something, but
yeah.
easy, right? But I guess the athletics, like being on the wrestling team, that was brutal. Just like we would work out for 3-4 hours a day and like run 5 miles and do 500 sit-ups, 500 push-ups, and like
Yeah.
I was probably in the best physical shape of my life, but just always physically exhausted during that season.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll never be in that shape again. I still see some of those guys, and now we're all out of shape, and now we're all committed to never working out again in our lives. Every single one
That's
of them. I know a
that's
bunch of
fun.
them actually still because, yeah, it's pretty wild.
So since you were so active, which of those things did you actually enjoy doing?
Enjoy. I don't think that was part of the equation. Again, a lot of just obligation, like you have to do this, like you have
Mm,
to take the hard classes so you can get into the good college, right? You have to, be on a sports team because, what kind of, like, I don't know what motivated me to join the sports team, but it was just something that you had to do. It's like, oh, you're a guy, right? Like you're gonna be. Oh, I was mad too because I joined the football team and I made the team, and then my mom kicked me off the team. She called the coach and said he can't be on the team. And I was like, you could have
ooh,
told me that beforehand before I went through all the practice and
yeah.
workouts and stuff. But yeah, so I was like, I'll show you. I'll join wrestling. And, broke my collarbone, ripped my knees up, ripped my elbows up, like totally way more damage ever than football would have been.
I'm not sure. I'm not 100% convinced of that. Just because of the brain impact that you
Ah,
high risk in football, you
could
know.
be. Could be. I don't know, but like wrestling, you get thrown around and you
You do,
get
you
thrown
get
down
tore
hard.
up. Yeah.
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 So we'll see. All I know is that
Mm.
my friends that played football that I still keep in contact with, they don't have the same injuries that I do.
Ah, I
So,
see.
I mean, our football team wasn't any good. So I don't know. Maybe it made a difference.
Got you. So it sounds like you were expected to do all these things and then expected to go to college.
Hmm.
So what was it like navigating that process and going to college?
College was great in the sense that I got to move away, right? I was like, free. Like, no more having to answer to anybody. Like, just the
Yeah.
independence of it. I think my whole life, we were kind of geared up to be, fiercely independent. Like, make your own money, do your own thing, make sure you get good grades. Like, they never helped me get good grades. They never helped me with like college applications. They never helped me with
Yeah.
like, it was just expected that I would know how to do it or I'd figure it out. And so
Mm-hmm.
that kind of, I think, when I think about it now, it kind of really prepared me for adulthood in that I always feel like I can figure it out, like no matter what it is, like because I'll outwork the person to make sure that I figure it out. Like I don't have to
Mm.
rely on others. That maybe that's good and maybe that's bad. It's probably in the end a lot more wasted time was me trying to figure out something that's hard when I could collaborate with others and probably do it
And
much
ask
quicker.
somebody for help.
Yeah, but that doesn't come naturally to me. Um,
Mm.
and it's
Yeah.
not that I'm opposed to it. I just always my first reaction is to see what I can do by myself before asking for help. And if I
Mm.
can't figure it out, I will. And it's only after I've exhausted things before I'm like, okay, I don't know how to work this Salesforce widget, whatever.
I got you. Where'd you go to college?
I went to UC Davis for 2 years, and then I transferred to UCLA.
Oh, interesting.
Oh.
Why'd you do that?
I
Just
really
transferring
wanted
from
to
a
go to,
4-year to another
yeah,
4-year.
I really wanted to go to Berkeley.
Okay.
And for some reason in my head, UC Davis was I didn't get accepted to Berkeley, which I was pissed. But for some reason in my head, UC Davis was an okay alternate because it was basically in the area, which I didn't realize, like, oh no, it's nothing like Berkeley. So once I got into Cowtown for 2 years, I was like, oh, I want something more urban. And so I transferred back to UCLA. And yeah. And again, living on my own for all that time.
Yeah. What did you major in?
I majored in political science, which because I thought I was going to go into law, and that political science was the precursor to getting into a good law school, I thought. And until I took
Mm.
like pre-law classes, and I was like, oh, no way am I going to do this. Yeah, that's the other like recurrent theme in my life is thinking I was going to do something or thinking it was going to be a certain way and then finding out how wrong I was. Like, oh, yeah, I'll go to Davis. That's near Berkeley. It's like, it's not even
Right.
really.
Nothing like Berkeley.
And then that was the first, like, my first time on campus at Davis was like my first day of school. Like, it didn't,
Hmm.
like, was move-in day. Like, it didn't occur to me, like, oh, I could go check it out or I could go do some things beforehand. Nope, it
Mm.
was just like, nope, I'll show up on the first day. I'll be fine. Undeserved optimism, confidence, like, it's all going to work out.
I mean, no matter how it works out, you figure it out, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's always been kind of my approach to things. And it's not a good thing. I
I think it
realize
depends on
now
the
as an adult.
situation.
Yeah, yeah. But as an adult, right? Like, it's like, no, you can plan for your retirement a little bit better than, oh, when it happens, it happens.
Yeah. What was it about the pre-law classes that drew you away after thinking that was what you were going to do with your major?
I guess it was just the tedious nature of the writing.
Mm.
It wasn't meant to be clear writing. It was like learning a jargon so that only
Yeah.
lawyers could actually parse through it. And I thought that's
Mm-hmm.
so anti like clarification that it doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah. The law is like very exact and not exact like vernacular is not common language,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. No, they have it has its own language that is deliberately, you know, mystifying. And
Yeah.
it just doesn't make any like I don't know if I would have been happy like purposefully making people confused.
It's a very good way to look at it. Purposely making people confused.
Well, because they want to be the arbitrators of the truth, right? They want
Yeah.
to be the holders of this expertise.
Yeah. So after figuring that out, what did you decide to do with your major, or maybe not with your major?
No, I never really figured it out. I kind of just went to saying, oh, okay, well, I've always been interested in being a teacher. And so for me, that was like, oh, I can be a history teacher because I've always liked all my history teachers in high school and in college. And so it was like, I could see myself doing this. This is, it's a material that I like. I like kind of being in front of the classroom. I like, talking about ideas. And, so I started, doing all of those things to help me prepare for a teacher. I went and lived in Mexico for a year because I thought, oh, if I'm going to be a teacher, I should know Spanish. And again, like a better way to learn Spanish is not just like packing a bag and moving to Mexico for a year. Right? It's just like, it'll be
But
fun.
it might work. But it might work.
No, it never occurred to me that it wouldn't work. Like, it was so dumb, right? So I just arrived in Mexico City with just like, $800 in a backpack. And it was like, all right, so when's the Spanish kicking in? And basically, I traveled all through Mexico hitchhiking and picking up odd jobs as a waiter and I picked up a lot of odd jobs just to keep myself kind of being able to travel and pay for things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a fun year, and I did learn Spanish. So I guess it all
Yeah.
worked out in the end. But like when I think
Yeah.
back on that, if my daughter was to ask me like, "Hey, I want to learn Spanish. I'm going to go to Mexico with $800 in my pocket. I'll see you in about a year, okay?" I'd be like, "That is the dumbest thing."
Or you could be like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's what I did. Go ahead.
I would really hope that my children are much smarter than I am, and that they wouldn't have to, repeat the same mistakes I did. Not that that was a mistake, but it was definitely like not well thought out, not planned at
Mm-hmm.
all. It was just like, oh yeah, no, I'll do this. But my Japanese got much better too, because I would
Oh,
get jobs in like these tourist towns where there were Japanese tourists and American tourists.
wow.
And so I
Yeah.
was a commodity in all of these tourist towns because I could speak Spanish, Japanese, and English. And they were like, oh, you're
Dang.
the trifecta. Yeah, you can serve anybody. And yeah, like I
That's
knew
pretty
like
dope.
3 phrases in French. So they were like, oh, you speak French too? I was like, of course. Of course. I can say, I don't speak French. Can you please speak to me in English? That's the only phrase that I knew in French that got me. That got me very far.
Far enough. Far enough. Cutting out a little bit. I
Yes.
don't know why.
I mean, I eventually met my wife there. Oh, yeah. Is that my side or your side?
Oh, in Mexico? Oh,
No,
oh,
I made it all the way to
maybe
Guatemala.
it's me.
And yeah, no, my wife was taking a year off to do volunteer work in Guatemala. And I was just working in a bar. And yeah, no, she's from
Ah,
Europe and she was taking a year off of med school from Europe.
what is-
I met my wife in Guatemala while I was working in a bar, and she was taking a year off of med school. She attended med school in Brussels, Belgium, but she was getting burned out on that. So she did some volunteer work in the jungles of Guatemala,
okay. And
and I
she's
just bumped into
Belgian?
her in one of these tourist towns. No, she's Dutch,
Okay.
but never officially lived in Holland.
Okay.
She was born and raised in Norway to Dutch immigrants.
Okay.
So her nationality is still Dutch because Norway doesn't grant citizenship to those that are born there. So, and then she grew up in Norway, Germany, France, and Belgium. So yeah, she could speak like 8 languages.
Dang, she had you beat. Not a
Oh, no, by
commodity
far.
anymore. She's coming for
Yeah,
your
yeah,
job.
no, exactly. So yeah, no. So the whole like, oh, I speak 3 languages, big deal, right?
That's cool.
But
That's
I
cool.
didn't live in 4 different countries either. So, and anyways, so yeah, and yeah. So where am I going with this story? Yeah. So no, so I met my wife. That was in '94, and we had a good time. We traveled around Guatemala for a bit, and then we didn't see each other again for like years and years and years. And just by chance, I at some point, like right around the late '90s, I spent a year in Spain,
Okay.
and I met up with her again in Brussels,
How did
and
you find
it
her?
kind of rekindled.
Did you was there
It wasn't
internet
that hard
or?
because we were still like we were still um, we would still exchange
Oh,
letters
okay,
every now
okay.
and then.
Cool. Cool.
So, but for 7 years, like
Wow.
yeah. So there was a big gap in between, right? And then yeah, and then she moved in with me in New York City, and yeah,
So you were
3
living
years
in
later we got
Spain
married.
and then moved to New York?
Yeah, after Spain, um, I moved to New York City. I didn't think we were going to be together after that. I just we'd spend like maybe a week together while I was in Spain. And so I didn't think anything was going to come of that.
Yeah.
And then after that, I moved to New York and we started, talking to each other on the phone, which is, at the time we would have to go get these like
The
prepaid
cards.
debit card
Yeah.
things.
Put in a super long
To dial
number.
in this
Yeah,
number.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like this 28-digit
Yep.
number to like call each other. And then
Internationally, yeah.
And we did that. Yeah. We did that for a few months and then, and then she moved to New York to be
Wow.
together. So
That's cool.
we've been together ever
Yeah.
since. So it's,
Wow.
that was 24 years ago now. That's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. It also is.
It is cool.
I'm sure there was a huge difference in who you were after you reconnected, right? Because you were fresh out of college, and then you came back and you're more adults and like more stable, I'm sure. And you're like, hey, I still vibe with you.
Yeah. No, it was, the funny thing is, right, like we reconnected and connected at such pretty different stages of our lives, right? Like, when I first met her in Guatemala, I was fleeing like 3 years of getting burned out on teaching, and just there was all this horrible drama going on in my schools that made me want to quit. And so I was at a kind of a different place then too, and then just was wild and free in Guatemala. Like nobody knows me; I can do anything. Again, like the independent streak, and is like, oh yeah, sure,
Yeah.
I can work in a bar. I speak 3 languages. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
I forget. I was probably getting paid like $20 a night, but it probably only cost $10 a day to live there. So I felt like I was rich. Yeah.
I got you.
I left with $800 flew into Mexico City on an open-ended ticket. And I think I flew home with like a little bit more than $800 a year later.
Okay.
And so
Dang.
I'm pretty resourceful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was going on in like your life between that 7 years? I guess since we kind of jumped from when you met her to re-meeting. So like, what did you do when you went back to the U.S.?
When I came back to the U.S., let's see, I was working in a nonprofit in a school in downtown Brooklyn.
Okay.
And
so you went back to New York right after that trip, basically.
Yeah. Right after the living in Spain for a year. And an old teacher friend of mine said, oh, I'm working at this charter school in downtown Brooklyn. We can get you a job there. And I was like, okay, great. I've always wanted to live in New York. I want to see what it's like. Thinking, I'll just do this job for a couple of years. And then I ended up, in these nonprofits and schools for another 10 plus years.
Yeah. Wait, I was asking about the year after Mexico, because you spent a year in Mexico, and then there's 7 years before you made that jump to Spain.
Oh, yeah.
So that one first.
After Mexico, what year was that? Anyways, I can't remember all the years. I'm terrible at that.
Maybe 94,
but
95?
I went into teaching. Yeah. I went into teaching.
Okay.
And so I was teaching in the Bay Area in San Francisco and San Leandro, which is a suburb of Oakland. And so I was teaching there for 3 years. And
there's a lot of Filipinos there, right?
Lots, tons.
San Leandro. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And that was tumultuous times too. Like I didn't know what I was doing as a teacher. So every day was like getting, killed for lack of skills and knowledge. The good thing is though, like, I think it was memorable in the sense that I never said I don't know. I would always make up something.
It's on brand, Erik. It's on brand.
Yeah. And the kids would love it, and I would just be like, this is the best. Like I could say anything, and I would always tell them, they're like, is that true? I'm like, well, go look it up. This is how you question things. Question me, and go look things up. Find things out for yourself. And nobody would ever look things up because it's too hard. They're not going to go to the library or something. So But I just got an email from somebody via LinkedIn. He was like, "Oh, I was your student like 25 years ago.
Wow.
You don't probably remember me, but you were the best, and you were funny, and you were this, and I learned so much. And because of you, I'm now a dedicated civil servant, and I work for the government. And
Wow.
I could attribute this to like you know, your influence." I was like, "That's great. That's awesome."
That's rad. I
It
feel like
is.
teaching is such a what is that called? It's a very delayed gratification.
Oh, for sure.
I hear a lot of
Like, because the whole
teachers,
time you're in it, you're
yeah,
mortified.
and the students don't know gratitude in that way yet, like they're children.
Yeah, they're only
Yeah.
16. They just know you're getting in the way of them having fun.
Okay, so it was high school. And
Yeah.
then what got you to Spain for a year after teaching?
Oh, what got me to Spain? There was like a huge kerfluffle at my school in San Leandro where there was a teacher. There was a controversy because there were two lesbian students that, they were holding hands, and it was a big deal at the time. And one teacher said, "Oh, this is, they're it's horrible. They can't do this," and grabbed them by the arms and took them to the principal's office.
Wow.
Wow, right? And because like, oh, they can't have open displays of affection, right? And it was a big kerfluffle, and all of the progressive teachers like myself were basically up in arms, like, "I can't believe you're doing this to, like, these are kids. Like, there's no way." And one of my fellow teachers said, "Well, I'm gay. Would you ever do that to me?" And then it got out, and the kids started saying, "Oh, they told their parents." There was a religious group of parents that were saying, "She's, proselytizing. She's trying to, she shouldn't ever be talking about her sexuality in the classroom." And she started getting death threats. She started getting like, it got really ugly really fast. It got up to the school board. I went to all these sit-ins. I went to school board meetings, and this went on for like pretty much the whole year. So there was lots of like drama in between me not knowing how to teach and me suffering that way too. But at that end of the year, when I was chosen to speak on behalf of the teachers to the school board, and when I got up to speak, they cut my mic, and I was furious because after all this I had prepared, and I prepared my remarks, what I was going to say, they cut me off and they cut my mic. And so I jumped up on the table and I basically called them a bunch of bigots, and I resigned publicly right
Wow.
there. And it was probably not the best thing to do, but
Dang.
I was just so angry.
Yeah. Why did they cut your mic?
Yeah. Because I think once they, saw that I wasn't gonna, well, I don't know. I don't know why they cut off my mic, but they basically didn't want to hear it
Like any of it.
of, yeah, of the decisions that, because they were basically not supportive of the teacher who was getting death threats.
Yeah.
And they were asking openly, like, "Well, why did she share her sexuality in class?"
Right.
And I was like, "What?" But it's all crazy town, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was there were a lot of things that happened that year, but that was the tip of the iceberg. So I quit in a huff. And I was like, "Oh, and now I have no job." Like, "Oh, what am I going to do?" "Well, maybe I'll move to Spain." "What's in Spain?" "I don't know. But my Spanish is starting to weaken, so maybe it'll pick up again." Again, dumb, like so dumb, like no plan at all. Like, "Oh, I'll figure out a way."
Yeah. But you
Got on
knew
a
what you
plane,
stood
flew to
for, and you
Spain.
knew that where you were wasn't aligning with that. So
Yeah,
nice.
no. And I had to, yeah. And I probably, there was another incident in that school during that school year where a student um, was imprisoned for really weak causes, where he and his brother went to a liquor store they were going to beat up the liquor store owner's son because the liquor store owner's son beat up their little brother because he accused him of stealing. And so the liquor store owner's son beat up their little brother. So these two kids, one of them was a student of mine, they go to the liquor store and like, hey, you can't beat up our little brother over this, right? And the liquor store owner comes out with a gun and shoots the older brother. Dead. The middle brother, who was my student, goes to jail for murder because that's what the law says. Like if a murder, happens when you're committing a crime, then you're responsible for that murder. Right. So he was in jail for the whole year on charges of murder when it was his brother that got murdered. Right. It's just craziness, right? Yeah.
Dang.
This is on top of like all the anti-gay stuff. This is on top of like, I had like 3 students go to jail for, they deserved it, but like they did horrible things, but it was just a lot of drama that year.
Yeah. I mean, it just sounds like a tough neighborhood, It
was. Yeah. One of my students died in a car accident. Like he had been staying after school with me, talking about like he was rebuilding this old VW van. He was going to go spend the summer like on a road trip. So he would talk to me after school every day and say, no, where's the places to check out and this and that. And over spring break, a drunk driver, T-boned him and killed him. And
dang.
It was just horrible. It was just horrible. And yeah, so all of this drama is all going on at the same time. And I was young. I wasn't prepared to deal with all of these things happening all at once. They're unrelated. And
yeah, but it's a lot to see.
In my mind, they were all
in front of you.
Yeah. In 1 year. Yeah. Right. So, yeah. And that's why I fled to Europe because, I could wipe my hands of everything, I guess, and just be. Yeah. So just fleeing, I guess.
I think there's a level of self-preservation there too, You obviously hit a point, and it wouldn't have been helpful for the students to continue in that way either, if you really didn't have the tools yet to be there.
Yeah. And, but when I quit, I remember the week after, there were some gay students that came to see me after school, and they were like, if you quit, who's going to be watching over us next year? And I was like, oh. I just felt horrible. I still see their faces, and like I still know their names. It's just like, oh, that's horrible. I hadn't considered that. It's just terrible. Yeah.
But no one was looking out for you all as teachers either, so.
Oh, for sure not. But still, we're the adults.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, we're supposed to be the adults.
It was. Yeah. No. And, the school board at the time, they were much older, much more conservative. So the idea that any of this was being talked, this was, in the years before Ellen could, she got canceled for mentioning it, right? So they were very different times.
Yeah.
But it also makes me very much more hopeful in the sense that even though in current times there's all this anti-LGBTQIA, hatred being spewed, but how quickly things can change. Because, when I was in high school, there was nobody openly gay. There was nobody that you couldn't even talk about those things. That there would, they would be physically assaulted if they came out and said anything like that. And how in one generation, how quickly that changed, the expectation. And I'm not saying it's perfect or better, or I'm not saying it's perfect or ideal, but it's so much better than what it was even 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So much better.
And even when you were a teacher.
Yeah. Like how bad was that, right? And so, if things can change that quickly, if attitudes and popular culture can shift so quickly, like within a generation, it makes me optimistic that things will definitely, with people actually working on it though, that things can get better. And it makes me optimistic.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like there's probably a part 2 in this recording somewhere, because I don't think we got through everything, but I want to be mindful of your time. Is there something that you have, I guess, learned in the last, last 10 years of your life that we didn't cover, or 20 years of your life that we didn't cover. I'm not really sure how much time we didn't, but that you want to impart on our listeners about lessons you've learned.
I would say the biggest lesson that I've learned in the past 10 years is really the introduction of mindfulness and my introduction to one of my mentors who is a DBT therapist. I don't know. DBT stands for dialectical behavioral therapy.
Okay.
But it's just basically, if I could sum it up, is can you become more aware of what's going on within you and outside of you so that you could kind of guide your emotions in the service of the things that you want? And rather than just being at the whims of, I'm angry, I'm going to act like this, or I'm happy and I'm going to act like this, or instead of letting your emotions and thoughts kind of run wild, it helps you focus and concentrate and use those things to better the situation, to look inwardly and outwardly to say, what's really going on here? Maybe my initial reaction isn't the best one, and to slow things down and to think about how you're going to respond to things instead of just reacting all the time. And had I learned that, I probably wouldn't have gone through so many of these things that I've gone through in my life. So, but it definitely makes for a much more pleasant middle age where I don't have to like get so hot about something or be so, I mean, it's not that I don't get hot about it, but I don't necessarily act on it.
Yeah.
And if I could teach that skill to younger people, like when they're making these decisions in life, it's not just, you're just reacting at the spur of the moment, but you're actually focusing your emotions and letting them guide your decisions, but to something that's a little bit more ethical, a little bit more compassionate, things that don't, necessarily come so naturally to everybody. But like, what is the other person thinking? To be more empathetic and to be able to be okay in your own shoes and to accept all of your own weaknesses, but to also, really look at other people without judgment too. And that's, being an Asian person, like we judge the second we see you, I think. And that's just like, I think a very common cultural trait. True. That I've unlearned in the past 10 years, that, providing people the benefit of the doubt to be more curious about like why or what the meaning of those things are, instead of, automatically knowing like that person's crazy.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah. So if I can impart anything, I would say everybody learn mindfulness.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and
Sure.
our feelings are not facts. That's one of the hardest lessons I've tried to really focus on in this last year, is that your feelings are an interpretation of the facts. And so they are constantly lying to us, even if we feel them incredibly strongly, our volition, because of our judgments of past things. They're not always telling you the truth. So I hear you on that.
Yeah. My mentor made me do this one weird thing where we had to repeat after her like a million times. Just because you feel it doesn't make it true. Yep. Like we would like dance around the classroom singing that. And so it stuck in my head. Just because I feel it doesn't mean it's true.
It's true.
And it's a hard lesson to learn. Like, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say I didn't learn that till much later in life.
We learn when we're ready also, so it's cool. Well, thank you for your time, Erik. I know we've kind of gone over a little bit, but hopefully I can get more of your time in the future, because I want to hear about the rest of the stuff that I didn't get to hear about.
Plenty of stories. See, that's the benefit too of having an unplanned life. You really stumble across crazy stuff like you would never do if you planned.
This is true. I catch myself planning too much, and then I just don't get to enjoy things as much as I probably could.
It wasn't all enjoyment.
That's fair. That's fair. Um,
Like, yeah, there's definitely low points in my life where I'm like, oh wow, what was I thinking? I have no money. I'm in like in a train station.
yeah. Is there
I'm
anywhere
hungry.
that folks could reach you if you wanted to be reached?
Sure. My email address is my name, eosugi@gmail.com. Always feel happy to come out and answer anything, any questions that I could answer. I'm a pretty open book.
All right. Sweet. Thanks for being on the podcast, Erik.
Okay. See you later.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Creating Your Conditions, a work of understanding conditions we are given, forged from, and we have yet to face. You can follow us on Instagram at Creating Your Conditions, which you can also find in the description of this episode. My name is Van, and it's been my pleasure to be your host. Keep creating, and I'll catch you in the next episode.